Good morning. And here I am on my third episode of Sally Talk. Thank you so much if you're here live. And if you are listening on the recording, thank you so much. I hit over 120 listens on my first two episodes. I'm very happy about that. And I also want to announce that on Monday, I'm going to start recording on Mondays kind of a lighter side episode, just a slice of life or something that I want to talk about or share, just to show that my recovery and that it's been 3 years and that I do think I have my sense of humor back and all of that. So I'm going to do that just to kind of balance these episodes out, because I know these are sad, but of course I felt necessary that I had to do these, do these episodes, because it was something that was dramatic that happened to me, and if I didn't discuss them, it kind of wouldn't make sense. So what I'm going to talk about today, and I'm going to get right into it, was it's kind of the aftermath. So I left off with driving away and from John's apartment and coming. So I came home and I just realizing like what had happened. And I could go through and walk through all of the details and all the steps, but what I decided made more sense to me for this and the podcast was to talk about the stages of grief and how that affected me. So I may jump a little bit back and forth, but I hope I can make it clear so that you'll understand what it is that I'm talking about. So first of all, one of the things that really struck me that I realized about myself is that I don't really like a lot of attention, and especially sympathy and pity. And since I had never gone through grief before, and since I never had anything really dramatic, in fact, John used to always get mad at me because I would say, I'm okay, it's good, I'm all good. And because I didn't want to show vulnerability, and it was very uncomfortable for me. Well, when something like this happens, all of a sudden, you're the focus. And the first thing was all of the messages and all of, my friends came over, the messages that came through on Facebook and all of it's amazing, the text messages. And what's great about that is that you can always put the phone away and you don't feel like looking. And then when you do feel like looking, you pick up the phone and you check them. So that was really amazing that we're in that day and age where when you need to know everybody's thinking about you, you can look at all of the messages. And then when you need a breather, you can literally just click off the phone. But one of the things, my friends coming over were amazing. I had one friend come over that night and look at me and say, do you want your son home from college? And I said yes. And then the next morning he just appeared. So of course I knew later, how that all went down, but the things that were happening and put in motion were amazing. And I loved all of that. It felt like a big blanket and a cloud that just all of a sudden came at me. And I think about sometimes since then when people make comments about thoughts and prayers and how, well, thoughts and prayers aren't really, what do they really do? And do they really, they don't matter and we need more than that and everything else. And I think that thoughts and prayers are absolutely, like, if somebody doesn't understand what thoughts and prayers do, then God bless them, because they probably haven't been in a tragic life event, which I don't wish on anybody, where everything turns on like a light switch and you just are flooded with them. So you definitely feel them, and you feel them, and it carries you through. And I think thoughts and prayers are on a higher plane. Sure, there's, but the spiritual level and the higher plane of what we're really all about here on this earth, that's where the thoughts and prayers kind of fall in that little category. So thoughts and prayers are super important. And just telling someone that's going through this that you love them and a couple of hearts and you're thinking about them, it's really all that's necessary. It means the world. So, but then the tangible stuff comes in. So now the tangible stuff is like the food. So the food came in, and that was amazing too. I mean, I had 4 hungry sons, so the food was very much welcome. And it came in, there was a food chain. People went rogue and just brought food and dropped food off, and there was a ton of food. But it did stress, I think, out my mother a little bit, because my mother was overwhelmed that something like this had happened to her daughter. And then she's also from the Depression era. And so getting all this food come in, it was just a big thing for her. And so she was wrapping it up and packaging it. And in fact, one time there was macaroni and cheese came in, and the kids came in and they were like, "Where's the mac and cheese?" And she had already sectioned it, put it in freezer bags, and it was already in the freezer. So it was just overwhelming with the food. But I mean, we got edible arrangements, we got all sorts of stuff, and it was just so generous and so amazing. But we ended up having to stop it because Mom started saying that she was going to make coffee cake for everybody who brought food. So we needed to stop the food. But that was amazing too. But I understand that's more of a tangible, and people feel like they've done something for us, and we were really grateful. And that was really wonderful. But all of that attention was hard for me to be that. And I think that's definitely been something I've had to work through, is accepting that kind of attention, accepting sympathy, accepting the love that was poured out to me. And it was just very humbling for me. So the 5 stages of grief that are in all the books and on the websites and everything are denial and anger, bargaining. And I like to add resentment to that, which will be another episode, because with suicide, I think resentment is a key factor in there. Depression and acceptance. So today I was trying to, it's funny, I always want to condense, and then I realized, this is my podcast, so I actually get to talk, and so I'm going to talk. So I'm going to talk about what I think I need to talk about. So denial and isolation is the first stage. And so it was interesting for me because I didn't really, because I was there and I witnessed, I was there. I saw him. The denial thing wasn't as strong with me as I would imagine it would be for somebody who didn't see, just heard about his death. And if you heard about it and you weren't there, my family was very upset, and friends that I went through this, and I can understand why. I didn't want to go through it either, of course. But if I wasn't there and I didn't find him and I didn't do all the things that I did do, if I had gone home that night and said, well, I'll just come by because I was, and I'll come by and I'll pick you up the next morning, I really feel like I would have really blamed myself and felt like I could have done something about it. But because I was there all the way through to the end, it helped me when I wrestled with whether I did everything I could. It helped me do that. It helped me come to the conclusion that I did everything humanly myself possible that I was capable of doing. So the denial phase was something that the only thing that I really remember of actually just not believing that he had died was I woke up in the middle of the night one night. I'd had trouble sleeping, obviously. I'd had to have all the lights on. It took me a while for me to even not sleep in the living room, all the lights on. And then I'd moved to my room and had all the lights on because I was asleep when he took his life. And then I woke up and found him. So I think that had something to do with it, that I didn't want to sleep because I was afraid when I woke up what would happen. And so that took me a little bit to get back. And that was hard for me because I'm a sleeper. I like to sleep. And I like to sleep through the night. I don't like to get up in the middle of the night. And I was lucky because all my children were sleepers. So that was hard for me. So I'd have all the lights on. And to this day, I still have to have music or a movie on the Kindle Fire for me to go to sleep. It's very difficult. I can't go to sleep with silence. And that's unnerving for me. But I did finally graduate to having the lights off. But I woke up. I remember waking up in the middle of the night about a couple of weeks after he had died, when I was finally in my room in the darkness, and it was scary. And I thought to myself, did we double check? Did we really make sure he was gone? Like, did I just assume he was gone, or did we double check he was gone? And it was very, very unnerving for me, because I've always been a very practical person. I'm good at math. I tutor math at Boys and Girls Club. I've always relied on my brain. I've always relied on my thoughts and my intuition and my, just to trust my gut, my instincts, and it served me well in my life. And all of a sudden, my brain was telling me that I hadn't checked to make sure he was gone. And did I make sure that the firemen checked that he was gone? And I'd never had anything like that before that was so irrational. And I literally had to sit there and walk through, which I did 100 times. I had to go back and walk through the entire event to settle my brain so I could go back to sleep, that I had done everything I could to make sure that he was really dead. And that was really very nerve-wracking for me, because that began kind of a whole like episode of my not trusting my brain. And it did not help me with my working through, did I do everything I could have to stop him from taking his life? And so that was just I don't know if that all makes sense, but that was a really moment. So that, I believe, was denial. Also, the other part of denial was that I was just in denial that now I was this person who had had their boyfriend commit suicide. I mean, it was just so hard for me to even wrap my head around that I was a person that had this horrible, tragic event. And the stigma attached to suicide is that maybe somebody could have done something. I remember when Anthony Bourdain died, I was listening to a NPR, and they were interviewing this reporter who he was from Vietnam. And the NPR reporter was interviewing the guy from Vietnam, and the guy from Vietnam was very upset because he was very close to Anthony Bourdain. And the NPR reporter said, it's so sad. The Vietnamese reporter was saying, it's so tragic. I really loved him. He was so wonderful. And the NPR you could tell his voice was young. He said, yeah, it is sad. His answer, help was a phone call away. And that just really struck me. I went, wow, that guy's never had anything to do with suicide, because it's just not that easy. It's not that simple. I don't think Anthony Bourdain, his issues, I'm sure, weren't just a phone call away. So the stigma of it is hard too. And so knowing that I was now part of that whole world was a shock for me. And so I was, I didn't want to be part of it. And I was. And so I was in denial a little bit of where I was, I guess, in the world. And, what defined me now. That was an extra thing. Single mom, divorced, and suicide survivor. That was hard for me to really accept. And then the isolation. So denial and isolation are together. And the isolation was interesting because that was so against my nature and my personality. That was what I did. I was really good at social situations. My business was networking and meeting new people. And that's just what I did. I talked to people online at grocery stores. I kid around with people, everywhere. And I can get to know anyone. John used to, when we were first dating, he was looking for work and he had to go to these networking things and he hated it. And he hated it because he felt like he was looking for a job and he looked like he was, not successful. And I said, yeah, but you have to go. It's okay. Let's just go. Bring me. I'll go with you. And I loved going to those things, and I'd meet with everybody and talk with everybody, and then he would bring me to the rap parties at the shows he worked on, and I used to get to know all the spouses and significant others of the other people that were dragged there, and we made it fun. And I learned a lot about editing. I really learned a lot about editing to the point where I could stand around with a bunch of editors and nod and not kind of understand what they were talking about. And I love that kind of stuff. And after when this happened to me, I didn't want to be around any strangers. I just didn't want to be around any strangers. I didn't know if it looked like on my forehead that I was, like this was, here I am and I'm a survivor of suicide, or, I don't know. It was just really something. And I couldn't be around strangers, and I noticed it. It's very gradual. It's not like this happens to you all of a sudden and you're like, wow, I don't want to. You just start canceling things, and you like make things, and then you start realizing any networking stuff that I was going to, or any business stuff, or anything that I was around, anyone who was, not. I don't know. I just didn't want to. I just didn't want to be around any strangers. And then I was starting to not want to be around anybody who were close to me, or any of my, any of my friends. I would cancel. And if anybody was having a dinner party or something like that, I'd cancel because I didn't want to talk about it. But then you do that. It's funny because you think, well, I'm taking care of myself. And so then you do that. But then you kind of then you start realizing that you do want to talk about it. And the longer you are isolated, the worse you feel. So then you peel yourself out and you drag yourself to things. And I was very lucky because I had a lot of friends of mine who would call me up and ask me to go to coffee or to lunch or to or hiking. And that was big. And hiking was good because it was something that would get me moving and walking and get me off the couch and away from watching Sense and Sensibility for the 100th time. So I was really, really lucky to have family and friends and people who would do that for me. So that was kind of, I definitely went through that, and I went in and out of that. And I still kind of do. I surprised myself that all of a sudden I won't want to go somewhere. So that bleeds into the anger. So I love John so much, and I had such sympathy for him in those last months, and I understood, how much pain he was in. When I was young, I'll be honest, when I was in my 20s, I remember thinking that suicide was a cop-out. I'm embarrassed to think about how strongly I felt that it was cowardly, and how dare you leave your family with all the pain and the anguish. And I did feel that way. And I'm embarrassed about that because now living through it, I so understand how much pain he was in, how much he felt like he was a burden, and how he thought that he was going to be a burden. And he felt that we probably would be sad for a while, but then we would, we'd be okay and would be better off without him. I know that's what he was thinking, and it breaks my heart. But I wasn't angry at him after it happened, and I knew it was a stage of grief, but I couldn't figure out how I was going to get that, like how I'd be angry at him. And it came over me. I literally in church, and somebody made an announcement about something that I knew he would have been really happy about. And although I feel like he's around me and he's around, and heard it, I thought that I was mad that I couldn't share it with him and that we couldn't talk about it and we couldn't go, oh, isn't this great, And I was, all of a sudden, I was just overwhelmingly angry at him. And as soon as church was out, I got in the car and I drove up to the top, to Mulholland Drive and overlook. That's a beautiful overlook that I love. And I had my journal with me because I had been carrying my journal with me. And I got out of the car and I walked over to the bench, and it was a beautiful day. And I mean strikingly beautiful. And I took a picture and I posted on Facebook and said, oh, it's a beautiful day. But little did anybody on Facebook know that I was sitting on that bench with a journal writing a hate letter. I was so angry. I was so angry at him. I was angry that he just left me holding the bag. I was angry at him for leaving his family holding the bag. I was angry at him for just giving up, because this was so not like him. And when I was in grief support, of course, we found out we all felt that way. But this was so not like John. John was, I think he felt like, most of his life, he was the kind of person that he felt like, look, people may not have known this, but he was managing his addictions. And I think it was Herculean. And so to do that, he was constantly doing something. He was so active. He was so busy. I mean, if he wasn't sailing, he was riding his motorcycle. If he wasn't riding his motorcycle, he was gardening. He was cooking. He was roasting coffee. He was playing a saxophone. If it was winter, he was skiing. If it was a beautiful day, he was playing tennis. He was riding his bicycle. I mean, it was kind of exhausting sometimes to go out with him, because I always knew we were going to do 10 things, and who knows in what order. Also, it was I would always feel in the morning when he would be at work, and I knew he'd be trapped in an editing booth for 6 or 7 hours. I knew he was going to say, hey, what are you doing today? Because he wanted to make sure that I was doing a lot, and packing my day, because everything was, now I look back, I was like, days were precious. He packed in really more than, 3 times more in his life than somebody his same age. And so for him, I know that he would have looked at his story. If it was somebody else, he would have been mad at that person for just dropping the ball and copping out. And so it just made me so angry that I wrote this letter, that I was just mad at him for doing something that he would have himself been mad about. And I just wrote this letter, and I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. I've only reread it once, but I got to the end of it, and I couldn't be mad at him, because it came down to, he was in pain. He was just at his, he just couldn't do it anymore. And he was exhausted. And you can look at all sorts of the issues of the medications or just everything. But the truth was, he just couldn't do it anymore. And he really felt like he was doing everybody a favor. And I just couldn't be mad at him. I got to the end of that journal, pages and pages. I don't even know how many pages I wrote. I wrote so many pages, and I couldn't be mad at him anymore. So that was the last time I was angry with him. I get angry every once in a while. I get angry when I go to things without him, because he was a lot of fun to go with. When I was divorced, before I met him, I didn't mind going to things by myself, because my ex-husband was kind of introverted and he was kind of hard to go to things with. But John, even though he didn't like social things, he still was able to dress, always knew how to dress, always knew how to be, was always a lot of fun. And it was hard. It's hard now to go to social things, and all I see is couples now. And it's hard to go to social things without after you've had somebody who is so much fun to be with. So I get angry every once in a while. I'll just say, mad at you, wish you were with me. But it's not, that day really was a powerful day for me to really unleash a lot of the anger I had toward him. And I've forgiven myself for that. I mean, I felt like that was something that needed to be done. So that's all for today. I'm going to end on a happy, kind of a magical story. I've decided how to end these because I have quite a few magical stories, and so I'm going to spread them out over the course of the next couple episodes. So after John passed away, my son Ian, my youngest son, I shouldn't use names, he is kind of a magical kid, and he come out from the backyard, and he had been playing outside, and he said that it was windy. And he said, Mom, he goes, John visits me as the wind. And I said, really? Why do you say that? And he said, well, you know how he was. He'd come in and he'd just stir everything up. He was like the wind. And I love that because I love wind. And when we go to the desert and everything, I really do love wind through trees and everything. And so I told my son that. And so I said, I love that you think that he's the wind. So a couple of weeks, a month later or so, we were hiking in Fryman Canyon, and all the wildflowers were out, and it was beautiful. And we went up to the top level where John and I used to hike. And so I was thinking about him, and we were just kind of, my son and I were just hiking together, and I said, the wind was coming through all these long grass. And I was thinking, oh, it's John, because it's the wind. And Ian turned around and went, oh, John's here with us. And I said, I was just thinking that. And then he turned to me and he said, oh, Mom, I forgot. And he was about 11 at this time. He said, Mom, I forgot to tell you. I was out walking the dog and a while ago, and the wind came through and it went up into this beautiful tree with a lot of little tiny leaves. And I watched it and it went up into the tree, and the leaves spelled out, thank you. And I said, well, what do you think that means? And he said, well, it was John. He was saying thank you. And I said, well, why do you think he was thanking you? And he said, well, because I'm a great kid. And I laughed because I thought, well, that's how John was. John would say kind of rascally stuff like that, and Ian was being funny. And I said, well, yeah, he really thought you were a great kid. And then Ian looked at me and said, no, Mom, he wanted me to tell you that. I was just kidding. And I just burst into tears. And Ian hugged me. And I knew it was true. I just knew it was true that he had gotten a message and that John had said thank you. And that wasn't the first one, and it's not the last one. I've gotten a lot of messages that he's still with me, and that makes it just makes me feel better, and it makes me feel like he's still with me. And he's still guiding me. And so I try to talk to him. I feel like he visits me. Well, that's another magical story, as a butterfly, but I'll talk about that another time. But this world is a lot bigger than we think it is. And when you have something like this happen, you see so much beauty, and you see so much more than your day-to-day life. And if you can keep your eyes open. And somebody said this to me, one of my Arbonne trainers, which was amazing, but he said to me, if you can keep your head above water and not go down in the spiral of blame and self-doubt and punishing yourself, if you can just keep your head above water through this, you'll get the answers to your questions. You'll get signs. And I really believe that, because I did. I got a lot of signs, and that one was one. So I want to thank you so much for joining me again. And these are really helping me, and I've really enjoyed putting them together every week. So like I said, I'm going to do another one on a totally different topic on Monday, and you can join me live or you can listen to my recording, but I'm going to try and add a little bit more variety and start having guests on my podcast. So thank you so much. I'll talk to you on Monday, and have a great weekend.
You're up in the sky, I'll carry you home, home to the mountaineers. And soon, my friend, you'll see them again, the ones you left behind, the ones you left behind. And I'll sing for you all the way home. But why does it feel like home isn't home? I've been in this war too long. It's in the air that I breathe, oh, it's in the trees. It shivers down my spine. It shivers down my spine. I just sing my song as I walk through the gate. And there she stands just like before, but she doesn't look the same. The fear in her eyes, I've seen it before, and she can't recall my name. No, she can't.